I mean, I have a gazillion questions,
Okay.
but one of the things that, and we probably won't have to spend a lot of time on this one simply because of the fact that a full hour show
Yep.
was done on it last week. Which you know about, obviously, and for those who might have missed that I said it in the beginning, a show was done last week with school board members Cindy Shagnon and Scott Earnshaw and the Bedford Teacher Association President Scott Earnshaw. And that whole show was devoted to the issue of the teacher pay raise and the fact that this year we'll be asked to approve a 2-year school contract rather than a 1-year. And all of that is kind of tied into 21 cents of the tax increase. So you heard all that show. Just then, this is totally a quick question.
Yep.
Is there anything that you want to add to that we didn't manage to cover last week? Because as I said, you've had a chance to hear it and hear what everybody had to say.
I think the thing that I would just add is that we've done a lot of work to gather data on compensation in
Right.
South Central districts.
Right.
And when we've looked at a combination of how much other districts provide benefits, the medical insurances, and how much they pay, on average, we find that our staff, our professional staff, are paid about average. And that to me undervalues the delivery of what I think families are getting. And I think our board has talked about setting a target for teacher compensation, not to be the leader, but to be 75th percentile. And so this contract gets us closer to that.
Okay.
It also, as Scott Earnshaw has talked about, is shifting the responsibility of our probably most variable high cost, which is health insurance,
Right.
more and more on the employee.
Right.
So we're all taking more of a share of that cost. And I think what that does is, going forward, it helps mitigate that increase. So, for example, our health insurance costs for next year are lower than this year
Yeah, I
as we
know.
sit here today. And
I
that's
know.
not the norm. And that's because the board has negotiated that in all its contracts. Enough said.
Okay. Yeah, and that's important to get across. I mean, I think that's one of the things that all of you are trying to really get the
And
public to understand.
I don't want to oversell or undersell the value of a good teacher in front of kids. I realize that the family provides
Of
a
course.
lot of opportunity for kids.
Of course.
And has a vital role in the success of the kids. But to undersell the value of teachers, I think, is also a mistake.
Okay. I don't think we can undersell it. It wouldn't be fair to anybody,
I
the
agree.
community, the kids, or the teachers. And again, I don't think we got to spend like a ton of time
Yep.
on the budget, but I'll throw a couple of questions at you. And we are definitely going to run over today. And if BCTV,
always come back. I can always come back.
If BCTV says we have to split it into 2 shows, that's okay.
Okay.
And we can live with that. In any event, as we know, but hopefully the audience is paying attention, the proposed fiscal year 14 budget, operating budget, is $62,660,875. And that's an increase of $1,628,271 over last year. And that whole budget will represent, and everything, lock, stock, and barrel, will represent a 52-cent tax increase on the school side of things. Now, we already know the 21 cents is going to be for the teacher contract. I'm sorry.
Bless you.
Oh, it wasn't a sneeze, a tickle. I should have taken a
you
drink before. And 2 cents is going to go toward what really are modest pay raises for the auxiliary personnel. So that leaves like 29 cents more out of the 52 that we're going to talk about. Now, the town side of the budget obviously got hit pretty bad this year by the state passing down the costs of the public employee pension costs. And obviously, so has the school side of things gotten hit with that. How, and I offhand don't know the dollar figure, but how many cents is that going to account for in the increase that you can do absolutely nothing about?
Well, it's about $650,000 to $700,000 that the additional employer contribution to the New Hampshire retirement system. Quick back of the napkin, $1 is about $3.4 million, so maybe 20 some odd, I don't know. Let's just say 700,000. They can do the mathematics on their own.
Yeah, so it's
a
substantial.
sizable chunk.
Yeah, it is substantial
Of the budget.
And there's nothing obviously you can do about that. I mean, the state inflicted that on everybody.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing we can do about that because by law, if a person an employee is eligible, then we have to pay the rate.
Yeah, understood. No, just so people understand, what the increases are about. Now, kind of pushing forward with the breakdown of the tax increase, and I did mention the, and I don't know, maybe it'd be a good idea if you did have something to add to that the other employee contracts that I mentioned that are only going to account for the 2 cents are the very modest wages for the custodial and maintenance staff, which is a penny, and for all the paraprofessionals, school secretaries, food service personnel, all those other folks who make up the system, that also accounts for that other penny.
Yep.
Is there anything in particular, and I know that they also have fallen in under the new insurance agreements and such, so is there, I mean, I don't see that that's an issue to anybody. Is there anything that you need to say about that?
Other than I value their efforts.
Oh, yeah.
They're very important people in our
of course
district.
they are.
Those agreements were negotiated, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. I think one of the things important to note is that the cost sharing on the part of teachers is in fact greater than it is for these contracts.
I know that, yeah.
And part of that is, I think to be fair,
Yeah.
a function of their wages.
Sure.
So I just think that people should know that.
Plus the other staff is in a different salary range, of course, as well, yeah.
Just, I think fairness is so important when you look people in the eye.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
That's probably an important part to note.
Okay. Now, what are the other budget drivers over which you really have limited control? I mean, for example, obviously heating costs, that's a wild card given any year. I mean, if we continue to have 20-degree weather, then the costs are going to be higher than they were last winter. But are there other big ones that you kind of have to guesstimate and hope you're coming in with, but nevertheless are going to remain there no matter anybody's best intentions?
Well, there's a difference between do you have control over it and how close can you estimate.
Well, no, that's what I said, limited control,
well, let's talk just fuel oil for a second.
Yeah.
We belong to a group purchasing that goes out and bids oil because we do have, most of our schools do use fuel oil.
Yeah.
Peter Woodbury is natural gas, which is much cheaper now. So we get the best rates we can for fuel oil by buying in a consortium, buying in bulk, and buying at the right time or times, because sometimes we make multiple purchases. And so that was mentioned the other night that we should do that. Well, the answer is that we do that.
You do that, yeah.
I think health insurance, we have little control.
Well,
we do shop insurance every now and then. I will tell you that when we've surveyed, this is what's interesting, we've surveyed the rates that we have for our plans amongst the 25 school districts in South Central New Hampshire. We have the lowest rates on comparable insurance plans. So there are districts that the cost of the insurance is anywhere from a couple of $1,000s more per individual up to $7,000 or $8,000 more. Just to give an example, family plan on the most typical insurance that we purchase, Manchester is $7,000 or $8,000 more for a family plan than we are.
Really?
So every employee.
Bad shopping or
could
what?
Be.
Or is some of this due to the fact that the teachers, as part of the concessions, took on more responsibility?
No, I'm talking about just the cost of the plan.
Just the flat cost, wow.
So that's an advantage. We talked about why are your per pupil costs lower? Our insurance rates are lowest. I think part of it is the health of the staff. They're mindful of using those services. All that, we have pushed our insurance company on occasion to let them know that we're willing to walk to another insurer. That gives us a little bit of a break on the rates.
Lose the business.
So all those things factor in. But health insurance is a wild card. It's a big number.
And it's not going to go down for anybody. I mean, we can see that coming.
And I think special education.
That's a wild one.
You don't control students who show up at your doorstep who have a learning disability. And so we need to do right for them. And again, balance that with the cost, obviously.
Now, is the state constantly coming down with new mandates related to that as well?
Well, the state...
Or the feds?
Yeah, I would say there's always tweaks and interpretations of
Yeah.
rules that change. But what's impacting us is the state is funding less reimbursement of catastrophic aid.
That's gone down as well?
They prorate it. So where they used to fully fund it, now they prorate it. And you never know. I mean, we set our tax rate in the fall using an estimated amount that we think we're going to get. And then in January, we find out. And so, you know, some years it's 60%. I'm hoping that it's around that again this year, but we don't know yet. And
yeah,
so it's hard to, you know, what's a wildcat? Well, revenue. You don't know exactly what you're going to get.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely. And again, you never know what's going to go on in Concord with the state legislature either.
Right.
I mean,
And so
that's probably the wildest card of all.
well, at this point, the state budget 2 years ago, we ended up having to put a contingency plan in place to set aside $1.1 million. So we didn't spend $1.1 million because we weren't sure how certain things were going to affect us.
So it had to just sit there.
No, we cut them all.
Oh, okay.
Right, we just didn't, and use that money to pay other things like New Hampshire retirement,
Oh, that's right. I remember
like
that.
vocational education
yeah.
tuition. And then we found out that we had set aside a little more than we needed, and so we just didn't spend it, and we returned that money this
Back
is
into the yeah, I remember that.
to
Back
reduce
to,
taxes.
Yeah.
So this year's another budget cycle. I'm just not sure there is a lot left that Bedford gets in revenues from the state that's going to be impacted.
But what's the state going to pass that will impact us in terms of what we have to give them?
The
or
biggest
pick
impact,
up?
well, the biggest impact to us is the adequate education grant, and that's this whole education funding question that's been debated throughout New Hampshire. And
You mean the whole Claremont?
yes, and so I've been kind of a grouch about it when I've testified, and the reason is that I mentioned those top 10 school districts. If you were a large school district 10 or 15 years ago, then you've been somewhat protected about your adequate education grant because they have limited the amount of money you can lose as you lose students. But if you were a small school district,
Really?
like Bedford was,
I guess I didn't realize that.
as you grew,
Yeah.
you were also limited on how much you
can
you can collect. And as a result,
That's a disconnect.
so here's the result. Merrimack gets about $9 or $10 million in aid.
Yeah.
We get 3.5. They have 300 less kids than we do. Okay?
Yeah, that's.
So there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So I try to respectfully address that issue with the legislature, but not everyone has sympathetic views towards Bedford.
No.
But when you look at
and they get so involved in political posturing and party platforms and such that you sometimes wonder if they're ever going to do anything right. Seriously.
it's a formula. It's based on enrollments. We have a lot of kids. We're a big district now, but the way that particular grant program has been administered, it has protected the districts in New Hampshire who had large enrollments back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and hurt school districts that have grown significantly, which we have, over 1,000 kids at one point.
Population has changed.
Just haven't got the aid.
Yeah.
That impacts us every year. So right now, if you do the formula, we should get about $7.7 million. We get 3.5, and that's every year.
Yeah, that's clearly wrong.
And you and I are paying the difference.
Well, yeah, that's clearly wrong. You know, a lot of people don't understand the whole concept of default budgets. Now, if voters would fail to approve this year's proposed budget that we'll all get to vote on in the ballot, we go to the default budget, which this year, if I did my math right, would be about $1,423,000 and $483, less than the proposed budget. So that's about $200,000 less than the budget we've lived with for the past year. Can you explain this whole concept of default budgets? And if the voters say no to your proposed budget and we bump back to that default budget, which is going to give you like $1.4 million less, what are you going to have to drop to stick within that default budget?
Be glad to talk about that. So let me just
I knew you'd have an answer.
let me clarify that.
Yes.
So
Did I give the wrong numbers?
well, yeah, I think we want to
did?
just clarify. So
All right.
the contracts
Yeah.
are voted on independently. And so they're really not, they eventually, if they get approved, would be part of the operating budget.
Oh, okay.
But the operating budget, which
Okay.
is Article 9, I want to say,
Okay.
is the proposed operating budget is $622,000 higher than the default budget.
Okay. That
Okay?
the rest of that money, yeah, you're
So-
absolutely right. Yeah, I misstated that because the rest of it deals
They
with
get
all
voted
the
on
salary
separately, and
adjustments
people
and
make
everything.
independent choices on those.
Okay, so you'd be looking at what, a $400,000 difference from this year's budget, correct? If we went to a default.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the math. It's
Something
just,
like
all I know
that.
is that we would, based on what we've proposed,
Yeah. Yeah.
if the voters did not approve the proposed budget, and hence we have the default budget,
Yeah.
we'd have to make reductions of $622,000, either to staffing or to improvements of McKelvey, or somehow we'd have to not spend that money.
Now, have you all talked about that? That if this were to happen, and I know you hope that it won't, but if it does happen, do you know yet what you're going to target has to go?
Administratively, we are having conversations about those things because you need to be planned for that.
Yeah.
As a board, we would talk about that only after the election, and so we need to be prepared to have that conversation, which we will.
The administrators,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
And you'll go to the board with that, obviously.
The default budget's in place because of our form of decision-making. So
Now, that's a law, isn't it?
It's the law.
default budget?
So the rule of thumb was, back in the good old days, we had an
Yeah.
annual meeting. If a budget got voted down, people would say, okay, well, we didn't want that budget, I'll make a motion for another one. And people resolved it that night.
That's how it came,
right?
oh, okay.
So when you walked out of the annual meeting, there was a budget because, in fact, there was a meeting that took place, and there was give and take that took place on whatever the people gathered there that night wanted,
Which could be 20 people.
which could be 20 people. So now going to a ballot vote, where you have to post something so many weeks before, like at the deliberative session, actually finalizes the number. So that happened Tuesday, which is about a month before the voting, a little over a month.
All right.
If there's not an alternative and people vote a budget down, then there is no budget. And now you have not raised and appropriated any money. And so they had to put, when they brought up Senate Bill 2, which is the form of government we have, they had to put in place some methodology to come up with an alternative.
So that, for
So-
all intents and purposes, the schools didn't just close.
That's right.
Okay.
Or municipalities, because
Okay.
it's the same on the town side,
Yep.
if they adopt that. And so there's a set of rules in the law that basically say, here's how you do it. And so
So that's established. You just don't pull a figure out of the woodwork and say, so this is what we'll go
do
for
not.
the default.
Nope.
Okay.
And so we post the default budget, and
Yeah, I
we
know you
post
do.
how
Yeah.
we arrived at it, and there's a set of rules in the law about how you do that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you arrive at that number.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people are confused by that.
Yep. But if you didn't have one, and they voted the budget down, now you have no budget, and
Yeah.
now you've got late March,
Yeah.
and you've got X months before
The money runs
July
out.
1st, which is the next fiscal year, and
Yeah.
how do you resolve that?
Yeah.
So I think that's why they did it.
Okay.
Obviously.
Okay. Well, that's a good explanation because as people have said that to me too.
Yep.
Like, what is this whole bit with default budgets, and doesn't it just give them what they want anyway? And so that was, I think,
Well-
something to ask.
It's interesting because we've gone 3 years where the proposed budget was actually less than the default.
know.
And this year's
I
the
know.
in 3 or 4 years where that's not the case.
So then some people should have been out lobbying to vote for the default, right?
Yeah. I respect what voters vote.
Hey, I have to,
You know,
I have to,
I know, I
say
get it.
these things to you,
I get it.
I have a couple of things I wanted to throw in.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Because again, there are questions that do come up, and there's not a lot of opportunity unless people want to go to school board meetings, and people don't, and they should. But even so, an agenda is an agenda, and people don't want to go in asking all kinds of silly questions that got nothing to do with what's going on. And I'm sure the school board appreciates that too. So they're not there till midnight every week.
They are
But-
volunteers,
Yeah, really.
and they put a lot of time in.
I know they do, yeah. People, obviously complain. And you know this. I mean, I'm not saying anything to you that's my opinion or that I'm being, sarcastic or anything. But there are people who believe that school administrators and or school boards see taxpayers as this endless source of funds, So I guess I'm going to give you a kind of a multi-part question. What would you say to Bedford taxpayers who say that, first of all, you and the school board aren't listening to their financial pain? And then kind of going off on that a little bit, I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact that the school system has tried to find other sources of income, and then we can get into a few of those.
Yep.
So, I mean, I guess the first part of the question, so that it's not like a 700-word question, would be, if you just had to make a quick, radio spot or something to somebody who said, what is it with you people? You think we're an endless source of money. Tell me.
Okay.
What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that it goes back to the responsibility we have of using the resources we have wisely, and also based on the needs of the kids we have. And so enrollment drives a lot of what we do, and as a result, if enrollments are increasing, then we have to, again, propose a budget that meets the goals of the board and so on. So in the last few years, I would just say we probably hit a peak 2 years ago in terms of our staffing. And in the last 2 years, like as of today versus 2 years ago, in the professional staff, that would be administrators, teachers, that pool, we are 22 plus people less. That is, we've reduced that many staff members and or supervisors and or directors, whatever you want to call them, of that group, because A, you got fewer kids, primarily at the elementary level, but I did make some reductions 2 years ago at the high school, because as we were ramping up, sometimes we were estimating what we needed for staffing, and when I saw what we had, we cut 4 staff members 2 years ago from the high school staff to get back to what I thought were reasonable numbers. This year, I'm proposing, well, we eliminated the Director of Human Resources position, and we went with a less staff, lower paid staff, saved $50,000. So we did that this year, from last year to this year. We're restructuring the elementary special education supervision. That's been going on now for 2 years. I talked about one earlier, saving about $40,000. On the other hand, at the middle school, I'm recommending an assistant principal.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So
and
Mr. Cranky would say to you, so you cut 22. How many did you add?
Well, during that period of time, that's the net.
have to do it.
That's the net. We are 22 full-time staff members less.
Okay.
So that's
including what was hired.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We got less professional staff.
Okay.
We've got less custodians. We restructured food service, eliminating some long-standing full-time benefited positions to go with fewer of those. Even though the staffing looks like we have more, the cost saving was about $50,000 to $60,000.
Well, I think just even with the custodial staff, didn't
We've reduced
some of
that.
and didn't some of the new hires become
Part-time.
part-time positions with no benefits?
Right. Part-time with less benefits.
Less benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the responsible answer is we have actively made adjustments to the staffing, which is, by the way, the most the biggest cost we have.
Of course
it's probably
it is,
70
yeah.
or 80% of the budget,
Well, probably with any company.
based on the needs of kids, but also the numbers of kids. And so it's a kind of a reallocation. So we have fewer people working here. We have fewer full-time people working here now than we did 2 years ago. And that's the responsibility I take very seriously. And that's what's expected of me by the board. And so...
So the long and the short of it is, if somebody comes
That's
up
what I
to
would
you...
say.
Yes, if somebody came up to you with a school board member saying you're not feeling our pain, you're able to look at them in the eye and say, yeah, we did, and this is how we did it.
I do feel confident that we've done it. Now, whether
Okay.
they will agree with me or not, that's a different thing.
You know,
I also-
life is full of disagreements.
Yeah, and I also say that having walked in other districts, so, and I'm sure that some people tell me I really don't care what happens in other districts, we try to be very thoughtful about how we use our money. And technology would be one area that I would be very careful at. We just don't spend crazily on technology. And
Which
we
is
are very
huge these days, yeah.
It's huge. Also beneficial to kids.
Yeah.
But I think we're very targeted in how we use the technology to get the bang for the buck.
Well, it's one of the things I'm going to talk to you about at future
Okay,
goals.
all right.
Definitely, because I
Yep.
know that that's something on everybody's mind. Well, having put you kind of through the ringer and saying, you know, that some people don't think you feel their pain, I know, obviously, for a fact, and hopefully people follow things enough to know that the administration and the school board has tried to be creative on a few occasions to have some income-producing things happen. Excuse me, and I know that this year, well, I guess was it last school year?
Last
You
year.
started the full-time kindergarten classes, which obviously has turned out to be a nice little piece of change coming in for those, you know, parents who had been looking for that. I know that up and running now are some of the community education courses, which people have to pay a fee for. I believe you also had a study committee that's working on trying to establish some online learning courses that obviously people would have to pay for. I sat on the fee study committee, probably to your continuing heartburn.
No, I thought you offered a lot of good opinions.
I don't know if everybody on the committee would agree with you. I think on occasion I might have driven a few people crazy.
Maybe. That's
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
They
Well, hey,
survived.
that was my role,
That's
you know. But in any event, through that came some changes that were either cost-saving or income-producing. There was some bus route changes dealing with the high school, which obviously saved the cost of a couple of buses that I think
we
then were
eliminated-
33
we
grand a
eliminated
year
3
each.
buses.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that was 99,000. There was a modest increase for the before school care program, and that's when people drop off their kids beforehand, before school starts, because they're going to get to work or whatever. There was an increase, and again, modest, but an increase nevertheless in the cardigan experience fee. And then, of course, there was one of my little pet projects was the high school student parking fee, which frankly I don't think ever can be high enough, and which frankly, and I still drive through the parking lot every now and then and see the late model SUVs and the Mercedes and so on that the little darlings drive to school and think, you know, if mom and dad can afford that, they can afford another $100 for parking. Personal observation. And I still drive down by Riley Field and see that full every day with student cars. And I've noticed in the past year, now when you continue down Nashua Road and go by Norman Doe Engineering and go by those fields, the baseball fields, that's full of student cars every day, to which I kind of want to get out with my stick and, you know, carry on. So that's something that, you know, we don't even have to discuss today.
Okay.
But that is something that kind of is a bone for me.
I clarify just on the kindergarten piece.
Yes.
It's not a full-day kindergarten. We call the program K+. Kindergarten is half-day.
Right.
And the Kindergarten Plus program really provides kind of a social developmental time for the kids for the rest of the day, which parents pay a fee for.
Yes, they do
but
pay
it's
a
not,
fee, yeah.
It's not an academic program. Not that wouldn't be a
no,
bad
that's
thing.
good to mention that,
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it has
It
proven
has-
to be very
It's a
popular.
win-win. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Parents enjoy the
And I'm
program.
sure it'll be expanded.
We're hoping to next year go to a 4th section in the morning.
Yeah.
And
Well,
again,
it's a good service to the
It pays for
kids,
itself.
yeah.
And generate some revenue depending on the
Exactly.
number of kids we get.
And it's a
so.
service to parents,
Right.
so I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing.
Yep.
And I think people like hearing those kind of projects. Of course, one of the things that we talked about at the fee study committee that again, at the time, there was not popular consensus for a wide variety of reasons, which we can get into if you want or don't have to. But, you know, there were suggestions, should there be student activity fees, particularly on the high school level, to help cover things like club costs, sports activities, or whatever. Should we look at athletic fees, which of course a lot of school systems do charge athletic fees for sports activities, or particular ones, the more expensive ones. We even talked about, should there be school bus fees, because we have seen some school districts find that they had to do that to help finance transportation. And then I think the one that really got a lot of attention and a lot of back and forth between the group was, should we be charging tickets for things like the football and basketball games that are attracting good crowds and could be a source of income. Are any of these things being talked about now, a couple of years later? Because, I mean, each and every one of those things has the potential for some income.
Right. So the board has basically said that they're going to review this annually. So typically in the spring, we have a conversation about some of the things you've talked about.
Yeah.
A, should we change parking fee? B, should we start charging for admissions for things?
Yeah.
And you know that there's always,
Well, yeah.
there's nuances to all those
Yeah,
things.
of
But
course there
the
is,
board
yeah.
has on its,
Yeah.
you know, its checkoff list
Yeah.
every April, May, June, a review of fees, and that's when they decide if they're going to change anything for the following year. So
Well, do you think it's a cursory review, or is it a really good review that the pros and cons are being discussed, and maybe even some dollar figures thrown around of what it would cost to implement and what the potential income would be?
Well,
Are
we've
they
done that.
going that far?
well, we've done that. As
No,
part
I'm
of that-
talking about yeah, but things change. I mean, you know, a couple of years ago, the attendance at the, for instance, football games wasn't as big as it is now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, you're talking different situations.
Right.
The attendance at some of the other games, I mean, one of the concerns was that if they charged for tickets for maybe girls' basketball or for the boys' basketball for that matter, that they wouldn't have crowds there.
Right.
Yet, that has built and built and built and developed a fan base, and people are showing up for them. So that issue is not as big now as it was 2 years ago.
Well, we had a conversation last spring
Yeah.
about, let's talk about admissions.
Yeah.
And if I recollect this correctly, we talked specifically about basketball. Football creates some issues around just the site makes it
I know
hard
that.
to do it.
I know
So we
that.
said,
There'd have to be
do
some
you want us,
cost,
Do
I
you
know.
want us to charge admission for basketball just to get a sense of how that would go? And ultimately, the board, after, you know, I think it was probably 2 or 3 meetings, opted not to do that.
I know they did.
So again, it comes back every spring.
Yeah, I
The
know.
long discussion we had last year was, should we try it? And the answer was no. We talked about student parking. I don't believe we changed it.
No, I didn't. I
So-
followed that. You
Yeah.
didn't.
So do I think it's cursory? No, because in the past we really haven't talked about piloting an admission and have a serious conversation about it. And they did have a pretty serious conversation about it.
Well, so that's, I guess, what I'm asking. Are we going to have a serious conversation about it?
It's on my checklist every spring.
Yeah?
Yeah, spring is not here yet.
So I should start emailing you and bug you a
Yeah,
little bit?
you
on
can
it?
bug
All
me.
right, all
Yeah,
right, okay.
anytime.
You know, and I have actually heard people say they don't understand, including, now this isn't, now I'm not talking the old cranky crowd, you know, that I know better than you
mean
might know.
my age?
Well, yeah, I
Okay.
guess so, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you're part of that too.
Yeah, I am.
But I mean, I'm talking even some of the parents and boosters, you know, who I've gotten to know who'd say, hey, I don't have a problem. They should be charging, you know, for tickets for the games. So that's why I say, I mean, I think it needs to be a continuing conversation, not just,
I think
You
what the
know.
board has tried to do, and
Excuse me.
I can't speak for them, so I won't, but I think what I've heard in the conversations have been, what is the potential revenue you can generate by doing that?
could be
And-
big bucks.
And what, that's relative.
could be.
That's relative, because now you start dealing with people that, I know people have said, well, we can get volunteers to do it. Well, volunteers aren't always reliable.
I know that.
So then you end up
Yeah, I know.
paying people to do
I
it.
know.
And so
Well, I know. I didn't say it was without issue. I know that.
at schools
Yeah.
that I've been at,
Yeah,
you're looking at, depending on what happens with the teams,
yeah.
you might end up with 10 to 15, maybe 20,000 in a good year revenue.
it's
It
not so
depends.
bad.
It depends.
That's
and
not so bad. That'd pay for something else.
right, if that in fact is what we're able to generate.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, do less kids come to games because you got to pay?
I don't
those are
think
all the-
so.
Well,
I don't think in a community like this, you know, most
That's a
of these kids are
rhetorical
walking
question.
around. Well, most
See?
of these kids are walking around with money in their pocket. And, you know, I got to tell you something. And again, I'm not saying that everybody in Bedford is rich. And certainly through all these meetings that I attended, everybody, universally including me, was that any of these fees or whatever would be waived, you know, in situations where it was a tough hoe for the family. And that's done very confidentially. I mean, it's done on a lot of things. So that's not the issue. But, I mean, overall, this is not a poor community. And overall, most of the kids, okay, of the kids aren't walking around looking like their families are in any particular financial plight. particularly when I do see things like the parking lot. I mean, when I was in high school, those kids who were lucky enough to have cars were driving old clunkers, $50 cars that were held together with tape in some cases. I don't see any of those up in that parking lot. I see more really nice cars. Some of them are a lot nicer than what I drive. I've heard teachers, and I'm sure you have as well, heard teachers say, hey, there's better cars in the student parking lots than there are in the teacher parking lots. So, I mean, I don't think for a kid to have to pay $1, and they'd pay less because they're students, to pay $1 or $2 to go to a football game, I really don't think that's going to hurt any of them. I truly do not. They spend more than that on snacks at the snack bar.
So then when we bring that up this year, at the
Shall I
board
be
level,
there?
you should be there.
Should I be there all fired up?
Just bring it as you typically do.
You want me to bring a crowd? Shall I get a crowd?
We like crowds.
All right, so listen, all of you,
you
when
go.
you hear about it. All right, now, I know that everybody's going to get very antsy if we don't end this soon.
Yep.
Is there anything that, I mean, I think IB has been covered. There'll always be
Yep.
critics. Common Core standards is certainly a subject, and there'll always be critics. Is there anything in these last couple of minutes, and literally I am talking, I can give you like maybe 2 to 3 at the most. Is there anything that you'd want to get in now that we somehow
haven't talked
managed
about?
not to? Yeah.
Well,
I mean, there must be something in your mind.
well,
That sounded awful, didn't
no,
it?
I think
I didn't mean it to be insulting. I know there's lots on your mind.
I think that one of the things that I guess I want to acknowledge, more
Yes.
than a pitch than acknowledge, is that I think people understand that our students academically have done fairly well.
They have.
Right?
Yes.
I want to just acknowledge that our schools, a part of our mission of our district is to develop kids who are curious,
Yes.
who are resourceful,
Yes.
and who are respectful of self and others. And what I see when I walk around and visit schools and classes is I see a lot of kids who are demonstrating those qualities, who experience things in their schools, such as raising funds for others, contributing to others, community
They're
service.
doing a lot of that, yeah.
And I think that's an aspect of our community and our schools that may go by the by when you start looking at kneecap tests and
Yeah.
SAT tests and
You're
college
right.
admissions.
Yeah, you're right.
That is, I think, well served by our faculties and by our parents and the community in bringing up our kids. And I just need to say that my experience is that that is maybe not, it's not our highest priority, but is a very important aspect of our schools, and I think we contribute in a good way in that area. And I want to acknowledge it, but also make sure parents know that they know that I think that's important.
Well, that's good. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, I or anybody else in town, and a lot of people do, and God bless you, because you keep you cool, and no matter what somebody says, you keep you cool. And I know any job like yours, whether it's town manager, school superintendent, chief of police, or whatever, you have to put up with a lot of public comments and a lot of criticism, and day to day,
Well, I think
you're
one of
going
the
to
things,
deal with that.
one of the things when you're dealing with parents
Yeah.
is
Oh, yeah,
that,
parents can be the worst.
well, I acknowledge that some parents get worked up over
Yes,
things.
they do, yeah.
But you're dealing with their children.
Yeah.
And what do we care most about other than our kids?
Yeah.
And so if I got to listen to a little high-pitched tone for a while
Yeah.
while they get down to a time where we can talk to each other,
Yep.
So be it. I get
And
that.
you do well at that, and that's exactly where I was going. That in addition to being the administrator and the boss of a whole lot of people and the one who has to figure out all the money, I suppose that would have to say that your number one job is to be the kid's biggest cheerleader and supporter. And to that end, I don't think anybody would fault you. I think you probably are their biggest advocate in town.
Well, they are. They're great. They're great
I
kids.
believe that.
And
yeah.
families.
I
so.
believe that. So that's why no matter what you say, I'll always say, hey, he's all right. He's a good guy.
I appreciate that.
Hey, it was fun having you.
Okay.
And you had no idea what I was going to ask you, and that's good. Because I think we were able to cover a lot of things that people don't get to hear just in conversation. And conversation clears things up sometimes more than reports do.
And I never used one slide. How about that?
You didn't. I can't
One
believe
slide,
it. I
one
almost
slide.
fell off my stool.
I know.
Unbelievable.
I'll have to come back and use more slides.
I know
another
it
time.
because I know you love slides. I
do,
know
I
this.
do.
Tim, thanks for
You're
being
welcome.
here.
My pleasure.
Thank
All
you.
right, Kathy.
Well, I hope you all learned a lot in this show. I hope you also enjoyed it because I think it's kind of entertaining in addition to informational. And certainly we will get Tim back again in the future. Until then, you tell it like it is. He did it. I did it. You need to do it. And until next time, bye-bye.